and I am your Advocacy Director. So I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to spend an hour with us and learn a little bit about what happened during this last legislative session. So we have the esteemed Marie Sullivan here, who will be presenting to us and letting us know what happened. So take it away, Marie.
Okay, well, thank you, Lizzie. Thank you to all of you who are taking time out of your evening away from family to join us here tonight. And I'd like to keep this fairly informal because honestly, it's not unmanageable. And so what I would say is Lizzie has promised to keep track of the chat. If you have a question as I'm going through something, please ask, right? I mean, let's not wait on any kind of formality until the very end. I don't want to get too far down any rabbit holes. So if it looks like we're veering that way, we might have to step back and then address it at the end. So anyway, so let's get started. I'm going to share my screen. So give me a minute just to make sure I can get this kind of up and rolling. Okay. So tonight we're going to talk all about advocacy. So just by way of background, I thought it might be helpful if we ground ourselves a little bit. So 2021 legislative session was a 105-day session. So it started in January. Session always starts the second Monday of January. So this year was a little bit later on the 11th. And it's 105 days. That counts Saturdays and Sundays. So it ended on Sunday, April 25th. And this is either the third or the fourth year that the legislature has actually ended on time. So no special sessions. I think we can all remember 2017, potentially, if you remember. We went way past July. We went into the middle of July, almost to the end of July. And that year they adjourned without a capital budget. It was crazy. What do they do in the odd years? They adopt 2-year spending plans. So they will adopt a 2-year operating budget. They'll a capital budget, which is the big construction budget, and then a transportation budget. And they will make tweaks to the current fiscal year. So fiscal years start July 1 and they end June 30th. So we are right now, and the way to think about fiscal years are they end with the year. So we are in fiscal year 21 right now. And there was a supplemental budget that was adopted in the 2020 session to make changes to the 2020 fiscal year. And this year, again, they made changes for the current year that ends June 30th. We had a bunch of new legislators, and what a legislative session to join, right? It's all virtual. They're elected virtually. Most people did no doorbelling last year, but we still had a pretty significant turnover in both the House and the Senate. Because of the virtual nature, we were told it was going to be very, very focused on climate change, dismantling systemic racism, police accountability and reform. And for the most part, those were huge issues that were tackled this year, and they passed a lot of legislation. As a virtual session, again, there were limited members on the floor. So the House actually had fewer members allowed on the floor than the Senate. All of the committee meetings were remote and via Zoom. And then written testimony could be submitted online, often because too many people had signed up and the committee chair ran out of time. And so it was very common to hear, you can testify or submit your testimony, please, online. And then there was also the ability to do position signups, which we used in our favor to support the lead in drinking water bill. And we had, I think Washington State PTA is accountable for more than 600 signatures signing in support for that bill. So Yay, yes. Legislators conducted their caucus meetings via Teams. And it was always interesting because they had two platforms open. And so if you're watching any of your kids that are on different platforms, you might have had legislators that were in their committee Zoom meeting forget to leave the Zoom, think they were in Teams and start their conversations, or vice versa. So it was kind of an interesting thing to watch. And there was, for a virtual session, I actually thought it went very smoothly. So reminder, we have a legislative platform that was adopted in October of 2020, and that's a 2-year platform. So this is what we went into the session with 5 big priorities and 3 also supported positions. I just want to say a big shout out to our people who submitted positions, the people who developed these amazing videos. And if you have not had time to go out there to the Washington State PTA advocacy page and look at each one of the individual positions that was adopted, there was a great video that accompanied each one of the positions, a great handout, and a lot of work from the people who read the scripts, the people who wrote the scripts, people who actually came up with the presentation. So I use these quite a bit during the session to tell people, hey, I know we don't have a lot of time, so if you want to hear what we're thinking about broadband, for instance, and digital equity, here's a great one to listen to. So again, and that's all member driven, all volunteer driven. So again, applause and kudos to you all. You're going to recognize your advocacy director there. But the other thing I want to really do a shout out to is, because of the virtual nature, we had more Washington State PTA members testify in more committees than I think we ever had. So here you'll see Susan Bear Joshi, who is your Advocate of the Year, testifying in House Appropriations. But you also have former President Janice Becerra testifying in, I think she's in the House Approps Committee, and you have Lissy also testifying. I think you were in the Senate Ways and Means Committee. So lots and lots of testimony. And again, you'll see while we're in the House Education Committee, we're also, here's our now president, in Community and Economic Development. We were in Behavioral Health. We were in the Healthcare and Wellness Committee. We were in lots of places that we usually are, and you'll see Gwen Loosemore here. And unfortunately, she was signed in as concerned citizen, but she was there representing Washington State PTA on one of the, I believe it was the High Capacity magazine. It was either that or the assault rifles. So, and that was in one of obviously the Law and Justice Committee. So you'll see lots and lots of our members who were testifying, and just very, very proud of the amount of time that you all spent doing those presentations, creating the testimony, and kind of going through the process of this crazy virtual world that we were all in. We also, I want to thank the Washington State PTA Comm team. Hopefully most of you had a chance to be signed up for this Focus on Advocacy newsletter that came out every week. And I think that was a really great weekly newsletter that I hope we can continue next year, but an easy way to package and for you to all get the information that hopefully you could use with your PTAs, with your councils, with your friends and neighbors. So how did we do? We were really successful, I just want to say. Again, kudos and hats off to all Washington State PTA members who testified, but also lots of PTA members signed in support for bills. There was quite a bit of testimony, written testimony that was submitted, and just very active working with your local legislators as well. So when we look at the list of wins, and these are kind of stacked up with things that we have supported this platform and also in the past. So school counselor funding at all grade levels, that's a big deal. It's a 0.5 school counselor. It doesn't start until the 22-23 school year, but it's not just for elementary schools, it's for all grade levels. It is for high poverty schools. And so I would hope that we can push that so that we can actually expand that out to all schools. But it's a foot in the door, it's a start, and it's related to our top one position around physical, mental health, and social emotional learning. Funding for 2 days of paraeducator training. So this has been on the platform in the past, and thank goodness the legislature adopted it again this year. And now there will be a total of 4 days of paraeducator training. That's really important because our paraeducators work with some of our students who are the most vulnerable in our schools. And for the most part, until the training and the program was put together, paraeducators were kind of thrown into classrooms without a lot of training on working with these students. So I know that your advocacy director, Lizzie, can tell you about that because she is a very active paraeducator. But anyway, very thrilled that we have those 2 days of ongoing training. So total of 4. Flexibility in LAP funding. So LAP in the past has been kind of told, well, you have to spend it this way or this way or this way, and you can't do this, you have to do this. All of that was removed this year. Unfortunately, the funding levels weren't increased, but at least there was a larger bit of flexibility, as well as the ability for districts to work more closely with community-based organizations when they choose to do that. Broadband funding and devices, big bill, and we'll talk about that, but with a goal of one-to-one devices for all of our students and training for all of our teachers, as well as our families, digital navigators embedded in our ESDs. So lots of work there. Plus we'll look at the broadband money, but quite an astonishing amount of state and federal money that was put toward broadband expansion. Seismic funding, there's $40 million in the capital budget to continue to look at high-risk schools, particularly those that are around the Oregon coast, or sorry, the Washington coast right now. And but as it's based on some of the geologic studies that have been done by the Department of Natural Resources in tandem with OSPI. Lead in drinking water. Again, I think this was really pushed over the finish line because of Washington State PTA's involvement. Washington State PTA parents really turned out. We wrote letters. We had an official letter from PTA, and then again, just kind of stacking the committee hearings with pros, making it really difficult for legislators to not be supportive. Emergency waivers for grad requirements. This is something that was done early in the session. And if any of you have students who are in 2020 or class of 2021, you'll know that it's important to be able to have that ability to do a waiver either for a credit or for a pathway. And we actually had a small group of our PTA Advocacy Committee that gathered and met with the State Board of Education to talk about what needed to be included as they were contemplating this legislation last fall, and then also in the rulemaking that was being developed in January and then in March. Changes to college and the high school. This is something that now allows our 9th graders to be able to be eligible for college and the high school college credit if they choose. But we made amendments that Washington State PTA asked for, really changed the way that the bill was shaped around making sure there's more information for parents and students about how college and the high school works, as well as information in the course catalogs that will talk about what does it cost if you really choose to go after that college level credit. Tip line effort. This is a bill that we had. It's related again to the gun prevention, preventing gun violence and suicide. There was a tip line fact sheet and a video that, again, if you haven't gone out and looked at, you certainly should. The bill died, but in the twist of what can always happen, the information and the direction to create a tip line for everything, but from suicide prevention as well as kind of anti-bullying and safety concerns was actually inserted into the budget. And so the Attorney General's office will implement that tip line. School meal lunch copays. So either last year or the year before, lunch copays had been eliminated for the elementary schools. Now it's eliminated for all students in any grade level who are eligible for free or reduced price meals. Mitigating climate change. This was a big one for Washington State PTA, wading into that. As you all know, the governor did sign 3 bills that were related to climate change. One is a cap and invest program, one's a low carbon fuels, and then there's an environmental justice bill. And these all work together. But again, Washington State PTA was there either trying to testify or submitting written testimony or providing letters of support. And then dismantling systemic racism, something that was adopted as a legislative principle last year. It was great to have that principle on the books because when things came up, we were able to sign in or testify when needed. So big, long lists there. On the semi-wins, the only reason I say semi is because I think we would have liked it to go a little bit further. But one of our top 5 priorities was preserving funding. And you all know transportation money for this year was very challenging for districts. If you have fewer kids riding your school buses or no kids riding your school buses, and the transportation funding formula is based on ridership primarily, then you know that your district's not going to get a lot of money, but they still have upkeep for the buses. They were still running their buses to do meals and homework and hotspots and all sorts of other things that were allowed under a governor's proclamation. So while I would have liked to have seen this, and I think the advocacy committee would have liked to have seen this as being 100% transportation funding, it should be at least 70% for most districts. Some will be higher, maybe some will be a little lower, but at least it does provide some stability for this year. And then we fought to make sure that the federal stimulus dollars that were coming in also were protected for recovery or for use under COVID and not used as to balance the rest of the state funding formulas, which is kind of where they started. And we were really pleased to see them, again, say ESSER 1 funds, those arrived to our school districts in September. We're not going to count those because they've, for the most part, been spent. And ESSER 3 dollars, those are the ones that were signed into law in January. Those are really good for at least 2 more years, and we want to keep them eligible for our learning recovery efforts. School-based health centers. So the policy was adopted here. So there will be, Department of Health will now be setting up an office of school-based health centers, but there wasn't any corresponding capital dollars to go with that. So there is a policy to be able to do that, which is a good thing, but no real money to help districts who might want to launch a school-based health center or might be interested in expanding what they have. OSPI will get additional staff for special education resources. This was something that I think we'd all like to see a lot more done for our students, our families with students with disabilities, so that they have more access to resources, so that they really know how to be good, strong advocates in their districts. And then there is additional funding to support CTE, the graduation pathways. And so that's a positive thing. And it's really about those schools that don't offer a lot of CTE or any CTE graduation pathway. This will allow some of those districts to hopefully start providing that pathway. So, but a lot left to do too. So preventing gun violence really took I will say it kind of took a back seat this year to all of the police accountability and reform bills. HICAP, universal screening, was on our also supported, and that is a bill that's been run for several years. Unfortunately, just really couldn't get it moved again this year. Simple majority for bonds. This year we had two different bills, one to do simple majority and one to lower the threshold from 60% to 55%. And neither moved. I think one of them did get a hearing, but for the most part, all of these bills that didn't get addressed this year are eligible to be addressed next year. And then there were a couple of bills around changes to graduation requirements. One of the bills would have decreased the number of credits from 24 to 20, while maintaining that the 17 core credits in the core subject areas had to be maintained, and then three enrichment electives. There was also a portfolio pathway associated with that. And so that didn't pass. And I think that there'll be some conversations that we need to have over the interim to say, where does PTA want to be with those? So I'm just going to give you kind of some really high level big pieces on the operating budget. So we talked about the fact that the legislature addressed pupil transportation. So you can see here, they did that in fiscal year 2021. It's a lot of money, 116 million for this school year. So that funding will be coming out to districts in the June apportionment. So it will be out to people before the June 30th, 2021 ends. And then that 33.86 million is for the period of time between July and August, basically. So because the school year's budgets don't end until the end of August. And so the way the apportionment works. So apportionment for the 2020-21 school year will still be getting dollars in July and August to close out this school year. So that's what that is. Some of you may be in districts that really don't get a lot of the federal stimulus money or didn't get it because they aren't a high Title I high poverty school. And so there was some money there to smooth that out. And you'll see that districts, this is the one place where the legislature said, we're going to look at all the money a district receives in the first round, the second round, and the third round. We're going to ask them to add all that up. We're going to divide it by the number of students. And if that number exceeds $500 per student, you're not going to get any money to smooth you. And if it's less than, we will match you up to the 500. Then there was also enrollment stabilization. This was a tough year for districts. Some districts saw around 3% enrollment decline. Other districts saw as high as, I've heard as high as 8.9% enrollment decline. A lot of those were in the early grades, but a lot of other parents, families, students made other choices. And so that enrollment decline really did hit districts when they had fixed contracts. All of the contracts for school districts have to be adopted by May 15th. And so that was, if you think about last May, they had adopted a budget based on what they thought was going to be their dollars and what their enrollment would be. And if enrollment declined by 8%, they still had those teachers that were on contract. They still had all of those costs that they needed to cover. So you'll see the way that the funding formula is there. And then we've talked about the school counselors. Then there were a number of COVID related programs. So there's 200 million that's unallocated right now that will probably, we heard from Superintendent Rakedale, is probably going to go out the door in the form of grants. There are summer enrichment grants. There's after school programming, outdoor school, dual language. This is for early education. Nearly 13 million for community-based organizations to support learning, recovery, and acceleration. And then 12 million really focused on students who are identified as homeless, and not just academic supports, but any of the wraparound services that those students need to better engage, particularly after this year was particularly difficult. There's also a bunch of one-time funding. So you'll see here, there was one-time funding for special education transition for students who turned 21 during either last school year or this school year, and they didn't graduate with a regular diploma based on the fact that, frankly, it was such a messed up last year and a half. There was additional money for IDEA, which is students with disabilities. You'll see one time for emergency food reimbursements. There's also summer and safe school meals. The feds have also extended meals throughout next year. And so there's been a lot of focus on making sure that students are fed. $12 million for inclusionary practices. This is for professional development for educators to make sure they understand how to best include students with disabilities. It's really that best practices in your general ed classrooms. And then a 1.6 million, I don't know if any of you are any of these districts, but a bill did pass that basically said if you have a Native American mascot or logo, you'll need to change that out unless you have an agreement and authorization from the closest federally recognized tribe. And so I'm hearing that this number is woefully inadequate. If you have a gym that has a reader board, that's got scoreboard, that's got the floor, all of that, and it has to be changed out in the next year and a half, that's going to be expensive for schools. So. And then additional kinds of things, the couple that I want to call out here, the technology and connectivity. So there's $24 million for a devices grant program that is with OSPI, and school districts as well as ESDs will apply to OSPI to get devices, again, with that goal of a one-to-one device. And that's a finite 1-year approach. And then the next year, they actually say we're going to increase MSOC, which is materials, supplies, operating costs, by $25. And that basically is the 23.5 million. But I don't know anybody who can buy a Chromebook for $25, but the idea is that you're not going to need to replace everybody's Chromebook right away. And so that's there. Talked about the Paraeducator funding. One thing that I know is really important to our PTAs is eliminating lunch copays. So this is basically 8.9 million. We talked about that a minute ago. You'll see the school nurse. ECAP expansion, additional slots. So additional 500 slots in FY22 and more in FY23. And then career connected learning. And I'm going to do capital budget, and then I'll do a pause, Lizzie, to see if there's any questions. But in the capital budget, so the School Construction Assistance Program is called SCAP. And in the past, it has been about $1 billion. And this is a match by the state to school districts who are doing new construction or modernization of their facilities. And this number is significantly down. Now, we think COVID had a lot to do with that. We think that not passing some bonds had something to do with that as well. But I would expect that number to increase maybe in 2 years because it definitely is one of the lower amounts that we have seen in a long time. But it does fully fund all of the projects that OSPI had in their queue for a state match. So it's not that they cut school construction, it's just that the school districts did not apply. School district modernization grants, these are for school districts that are very small. I'm trying to think if it's 1,000 or 500 students, but they don't have the bond capacity that a bigger district does. And so this actually allows for kind of big ticket item replacements like HVAC systems or boilers or things like that. So there were 12 school districts that got the 33.7 million. And then there were planning grants to get districts kind of queued up. And then there was another 4.2 million to tribal compact schools. The other thing just to mention here is the lead remediation, 3.6 million. That's to replace fixtures that are found to have lead in drinking water. And then you'll see the 40 million from the seismic. So this is up significantly. Again, I think it was somewhere around 12 million the previous biennium, so significant increase. And then an interesting one that was added to the budget at the end was $5 million for broadband equity and affordability grants, and school districts are eligible to apply for those. So Lizzie, let's pause there for a minute. And are there any questions that we need to deal with budget?
Nope, nothing in the chat along that.
Okay. All right. So let's shift then to our bills. And I'm going to go through these really quickly because we've talked about quite a few. But what I've done is tried to give you a sense, and we will have this presentation available if anyone is asking. I'm not sure where it'll get posted, but we'll make sure it is posted. But so looking at our top.
I
Yes.
apologize for interrupting. I'm sorry. This is Marissa Phillips. I just have a question. So this is all super interesting, and I really appreciate you going through it. I wonder, are there any resources for us to access that maybe would help us understand what the district level impact of these various legislative pieces might be? And like I just, that popped in my head when you were talking about that last grant where you said, districts are eligible to apply for these things. And then it made me wonder, well, what about the other stuff? How can we figure out what the district level impact is?
That's a great question. So here's what I've done. So the end of session report is going to be a monster, and it's not one that most people are going to want to go through. But the first 12 pages of it really are new requirements at the school district level by school year. And so you will be able to look at what are the types of things that are taking place for the 2021-22 school year. And those are, as well as there's a breakdown of what are all the budget pieces, the grant programs are listed again. And so it's an opportunity for you to take either this presentation or to take that or some combo if you wanted to talk to your school districts and say, hey, can we talk a little bit more about these broadband equity grants? Did you know that we're eligible? Now, on most of the grants, I will just say OSPI isn't ready yet to start getting that money out. They are going to set some floors. So it won't be a formula driven type thing. They will look at need first, but I would not expect them to be ready to go on any of those grant programs until probably later this fall, just because they're dealing with so much money, 2.8 billion to get out the door. That's the federal dollars.
So okay. Maurice, somebody had a question too. Oh, Clarissa, were you done? Because I just wanted to ask the question that was in the chat.
No, I'm done. Thank you. That was really helpful.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
So somebody asked, does each district need to then apply for these funds, or are they automatically given to the districts? So the 2.8 billion that districts are getting, that's basically in the federal dollars, is stuff that they do not have to apply to. So let me just see. So the things that they're going to be applying for will be, let me go back here. Okay, so these COVID related programs, these are all going to be grants that districts will have to apply for. So if you look at things like the operating budget, the pupil transportation, going to go out in their apportionment, the smoothing, it's going to go out in the apportionment, enrollment stabilization out. School counselors doesn't start until the next school year, not this coming school year, but the following, but it will also go out in apportionment. So all of those things are just automatically districts won't have to apply for. But these things are things that OSPI is going to create
they're going to be individual grant programs, and districts will need to apply to OSPI for those. And they use a system called iGrants, the iGrants system. And then much the same with this. You know, all of these pieces are things that your district would be applying for. And again, some of these, so like the technology and connectivity grants, those are things that districts would be applying for. But the MSOC, when it kicks over to the MSOC, then they don't need to apply for that anymore, because it just will be part of their base apportionment. And MSOC is actually based per student in your district, not by the school. And so, well, it is by prototypical school, but so again, no need to apply. The Paraeducator Training, that's a reimbursement. So yes, they would apply. And some of these other, the funding, like for districts to expand their graduation pathways, including career connected learning. Again, that's a grant program. Lunch co-pays, the school nurse core safety ESD, that's actually something that's really run at it's not something they would have to apply to. Yes, suicide tip line, not something. ECAP slots, yes, but typically some school districts run an ECAP program, others do it through their ESDs, others partner with a community-based organization. So that's a little bit of a mix there. And then the career connected learning. So it's going to be a little bit of a mix, because some of them were actually identified. So you'll see here Federal Way and Marysville are going to get very specific amounts, and then the others would be up kind of for grabs. And then again, in the capital, small district modernization, I don't think we've got any small district folks here, but those are things that you apply through OSPI. Same with the health and safety. If you have some kind of urgent repair, lead remediation will be applying. The seismic, that group of districts is already selected, as is the early learning facilities. With both of those, they identify them in the even year, so that they are in the budget and on a project list for the odd year budget adoption, and then the broadband equity grants. And what I will share is that your budget teams at your school districts are very aware of this. OSPI does a pretty good job of giving them a list of what they can apply for and what's eligible. Anything else, Lizzie?
No.
Okay. Are we really at 7:13? All right, I'm going to slip through. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. Okay, so what I did here is tried to give you the information based on things that were under our adopted legislative agenda. So these bills are really related to mental, physical health, and social emotional learning. Again, we've talked about these. These are really related to that preserving education funding. We had 3 big bills around closing the digital divide and broadband. So the 1365 is that one-to-one broadband device, as well as setting up digital navigators in the ESDs and working on professional development around computer training. 1336 and 5383 are ones that we testified on quite a bit. They're really about expanding who offers broadband services and making it broader, so to speak, than just your regular CenturyLink or Xfinity or those that are your traditional players, but allowing public utilities, PUDs, ports, cities, counties to be able to get into that retail market if they can. Lots of other things then too. We had around civil protection orders. There's the new 9.8, the national 988 system that's being created And so that's out there. The climate change mitigation, again, these are the three big climate bills. And then there was the environmental justice bill, which is Senate Bill 5141. Lots and lots on the dismantling systemic racism. So you'll see here, there was a lot of attention focused on use of force, on data collection, on intervening, on tactics and equipment. So quite a bit of look and say, how are we policing right now? Not really about a defunding the police, but how do we make sure that we're doing this good? What are the best practices? How do we make sure that we are doing everything we can to be peace officers, which is the formal term. And you'll see additional things here too. Several bills around cultural competency, diversity, equity, inclusion. So 2 bills just to call out for you. 1426 is about certificate renewals for your certificated instructional staff, so your teachers and your principals and your superintendents. So every 5 years they have to renew their certificate, and 25% of that training will need to be in cultural competency, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Senate Bill 5044 is the one that's getting a lot of attention in the media right now. Some people are saying this is focusing on critical race theory. What I will share with you, it is professional learning for the adults in the building around equity, cultural competencies, dismantling institutional racism. So the training is not for students. It is not content driven. It is not changes to curriculum. It is about professional learning for the adults in the building on how they can be more culturally responsive and think about the different systems that may keep certain students down. And so how do we do a better job of addressing that? So that's what that bill is, but a lot of districts are really grappling with it. The School Directors Association and the School Superintendents Association have put together some information on that as well.
Okay, Marie.
Yeah.
Somebody asked, where do you think the legislature will go on future work addressing systemic racism?
It's a good question. So next year is a short session. It's a 60-day session. It is usually used for kind of cleaning up the budgets, things that maybe they missed. And it's also a look at bills. I would think they're going to take a fairly, I would not expect a lot in the next school year because there are quite a few work groups. There are some reports that are due. And I think once those come back in, you will start to see some changes. The one thing that we might have a little bit of change next year would be around language access and making sure that there are appropriate interpreters for particularly high risk types of educational situations, so that a parent whose language is not English as a first language isn't having their student translate when they're dealing with a particular potentially disciplinary hearing, for instance, or disciplinary meeting. So language access might be one of those things. But I think the legislature is going to feel that it did a lot this year, and they do want to say, how do we take advantage of what we're learning under COVID and come back. I would not be surprised if things come back for the 2023 session. So graduation requirements, lots there. You'll see this. Again, just many things that were happening. One that I want to call out, if you have any of your students who are middle school going into high school or high school, 5249 extends the mastery-based learning work group, But the interesting thing about this one is that by, I believe it's December, the State Board of Education and a broad group of people need to come up with a profile of a graduate. And the profile of the graduate is not new. It's something that's in other states, but it would be new for Washington. And it basically is, what are those skills that need to be mastered in order for us to know that a student is ready to graduate. So it's kind of a different way of looking at the typical traditional seat time. You've earned 24 credits, you've got this many hours of time, you're going to graduate. So it's one that we're going to keep an eye on and hopefully participate in some of the focus groups. So again, lots in general education. I guess what I want you to just understand from this is, even though legislators even though leadership told their members, don't do a lot, it's a virtual session, we don't know, how it's going to run, they did a lot. There were more than 300 bills that passed this year and were signed into law. So early learning, new revenue, excise tax on capital gains, over 250,000. Lots of things are excluded. Sale of a house, for instance, sale of a business. But that's expected to be challenged in the courts, taken in potentially in initiative as well. So what are we doing right now? We're looking around to say what's missing so that we can make sure that we are prepared for the next legislative session. And you may see things that come forward at Legislative Assembly. We're reviewing anything that's been submitted around changes to resolutions. Resolutions are a really great tool. The legislative positions are a 2-year platform. Resolutions obviously are longer, and they can have a lot more information in them, and we can use them as a filter when we're evaluating different legislation. And then I'm meeting with legislators and stakeholders. So that's what I'm doing. So what can you be doing? Leave you with this to think about. Interim is really June to December, right? Session will kick off again the second Monday of January 2022. So what can you do? Celebrate the successes and thank your legislators for an amazing session. So you can do that through emails or meeting with them in person. The end of the session report that I mentioned will be out and posted. It is going to be long, but I try to make it really easy to follow. The scorecard will also be out there, and it will have the school year requirements so that you can actually look at that. And if there's something that you're particularly interested or passionate about, go to your principal or go to the school board, or talk with members of the district and say, hey, did you know that dyslexia is required to be, every student needs to be screened for dyslexia, and make sure that they're aware of what's happening, because again, it's a year-to-year requirement. I challenge you to identify one issue that's on our platform to talk with legislators about. It's a good thing where you can, again, look at what we did that passed under that platform and what's left to do. And in the end of session report, it will say bills that passed and bills that didn't pass. Invite your legislators. It's not too late still for an end of session wrap if you haven't done that, or preparing for next session, which a lot of people did last year. It was great, or do both. Because legislators, they all took their break in May, and now they're getting ready to get back into it. So participate in Legisassembly, and then I would say consider volunteering to participate next session. We are hungry to find people who are willing to testify, who are willing to write letters, willing to submit written testimony. All of that we did this year is just amazing. And I know that we will have a great year next year. So that's what I've got. And boy, I'm super sorry that I talked so long, but what are some other questions?
Somebody asked about are students able to testify? And do you think there'll be a virtual aspect to future legislative sessions?
So yes, students are eligible, and I will tell you that I recognize a few names on here where I know they have had their students testify, and student voice can be very powerful, particularly this year on the school mascot bill, for instance, the Native American mascot bill. There were several students, Native American students, who testified about how those mascots made them feel, and it was very powerful testimony. There are also times where they're testifying about homelessness or lunch meals, other things. So student voice can be very, very powerful, and legislators like to ask them questions. So I would say if you've got a budding debater, good idea. And then on virtual, I will share that I think it's going to be, I've been talking with chairs to see how they feel about that. And the consensus that I'm hearing is that they're not going to be closed to it, but it probably will not look like this year. It's too difficult to do a hybrid. It would be really difficult to say, we're going to set aside 15 minutes for this bill, and 7.5 of it's going to be in person and 7.5 will be Zoom, because we all knew how much time it took to do those Zoom testimony, right? You had to get let into the waiting room, and there was a pause, and that was, is my camera on, or am I muted, or, you know, so I'm not hearing a lot of love for continuing that, but I'm hoping that there is a place for it, because it truly allowed so many people who didn't necessarily come to Olympia to participate. So. Other questions?
I don't see anything in the chat, but somebody did want to know, are these slides going to be anywhere? Or are you just going to keep those
Yes,
to
I hope
yourself?
these slides will be somewhere.
Okay.
I can't tell you where they will be, but they definitely will be shared with Washington State PTA Comm team, and it will be posted. It's possible, I don't know, we can, Lizzie, you and I can talk about the team and see if maybe they could go out even in a focus on advocacy type piece with the recording. So.
Okay. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So does anybody out there that didn't get a chance to ask?
And I see a question or a comment that can they be mailed out to participants? So we know who obviously registered. So I don't see any problem doing that. So
we'll talk to the
powers that be and make sure that that's okay.
All right. Well.
Okay, anything else? Honestly.
Yeah.
Wondering, just, it kind of made me think that maybe accessibility through Zoom is something we want to push with legislators, if that was really key for our members to be able to do. So it would be interesting to, I don't know, find a way to poll PTA members and see how important it was, and then like later add that to our issues or something.
Yeah, you know, I think if you've ever come to Olympia to testify, and I recognize several of you have, you know, you'll drive your however many hours to get to Olympia. You will sit waiting to get called up, and you may or may not get to testify to the amount of time that you thought you were going to get, but at the max you'll get, you know, 2 minutes, and then you'll turn around and drive all the way back. And so it's a full day, and it discourages people from the east side of the state from participating, or from Southwest Washington, or from the upper. It's much more positive if you can do it. It is a lot of work. And when I've talked to the committee chairs, they talk about how challenging it really was, and how difficult to manage, and how a lot of people didn't get as much time as they would have liked. But but again, I think it's worth the conversation, and definitely worth us continuing to push for remote access. A couple of things that I really particularly liked, even if we couldn't get all of the remote testimony, and I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts. I was trying to think of what are some of those bills where you could set time aside, or maybe it's one day that's set aside a week that's Zoom. So it's not every day, because I understand how problematic, but the being allowed to do written testimony submitted directly into the committee hearing and having that go to committee members, that was huge. The second thing is being able from wherever you were to say, here's my name, I'm a parent advocate and I support this bill, without having to be on campus, because right now it's required to be on campus to do that. That was huge. I mean, again, that led to our lead-based paint, where we had more than 600 parent advocates sign in support of the bill in the budget committee. And again, that's pretty hard to ignore. So that I would hope that they could keep those two pieces. And then again, you know, maybe it's one day a week that's for Zooming. I don't know. But I'd like to see something that allows people to continue to participate.
Well, I mean, and Marie, I mean, I'm just kind of wondering, I mean, they spent all this, the session a lot about equity. You know, it seems like that would be an equity issue for the voters of Washington. So I guess I wonder, you know, has that, you know, I mean, have they thought about that, or have we, you know, that discussion has happened?
Well, here's what's interesting. So the remote testimony was something that the Senate had been doing, but you had to ask the committee chair for permission, and typically you could only have 2 or 3 people do it, right? And you almost had to make a hardship case to have that remote testimony. And it was never in a budget committee, it was in the policy committees. In the House, they were starting to pilot it. So they actually had 3 committees that didn't do it at the same time, right? So one week might be the House Local Government Committee, and the next week might be a different committee, and then the third week was a different committee. So they didn't have any of the synchronous like they had to do this year. So TBW really outdid itself by showing all of these and by all of them going on at the same time. So, you know, it's an interesting thought to say, all right, I think the House is going to be more grudging about it than the Senate would be my guess, because the Senate's done it a little bit more. But again, in talking to some of the committee chairs, they've expressed concern about the amount of time that it takes away. Just one last thought. So in order for them to do it the way they did, all the committees actually had 10 minutes less time each committee meeting. And so, you know, that's 10 less minutes of testimony, which doesn't sound like a lot, but again, it's potentially 10 speakers. So I think that's part of their concern, but we'll keep at it. And I think there's some good ideas there about adopting it as a principle, or adopting a position.
Yeah, or just even sitting down and making, like having people that, like you guys that know stuff about this, listing the pros and cons and figuring out, you know, what's a good thing to ask for, is it good to ask for? Like, we think it worked good, but what were the downsides?
Well, and for Susan, Nancy, Lizzie, any of you who testified. Yes, Susan, we'll be brave, be bold, and reach for the stars. Should we say, what's the Star Trek thing? Okay, we're a little over now, but I do want to see if we've answered questions, or if there's anyone else who wants to share, because we're a small group, small but mighty.
And I'm just going to plug right now, as your advocacy director, if any of you would like to join either the advocacy committee or a resolutions committee or both, please reach out to me. I am always looking for more committee members. And so I encourage you to, if you have any questions, about what does this mean, how much of a commitment, shoot me an email. I'll drop in my email here into the chat. Oh, and Legislative Assembly is going to be October 23rd to the 24th. Location to be determined. We're still, I'm still planning. I have to get my committee together. So I will have more information once I know what we're doing.
Yeah, so that's so we're thinking that might be in person?
Yes, at this point, that's what we are thinking. What is
So we want to be in person, and we are looking for venues. The one we wanted to book isn't booking yet, so hopefully it will be soon. And Clarissa, we are thinking hard about how to do something that's virtual as well, because we did open up to new people. The last Ledge Assembly, we had people from all over the state. We don't want to shut that out. But for those of you who participated in convention or Ledge Assembly last time, the debate and voting is not quite the same when it's virtual. And so if we want that robust conversation and the ability to amend things as the members want, we really have to do that in person.
Great. Okay, well, again, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate you being here. And look for the slides, look for the end of session report, look for the scorecard. Obviously, do not be daunted by the end of session report. And I hope you have a great week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
So
everyone.
thank you.